Lately, it feels like the whole world is breathing in short cycles. Not seasons, not years, just the next notification, the next deadline, the next paycheck, the next headline, the next update. We live in a time where progress is measured in refresh rates, and the most common emotion in the room isn't ambition, it's urgency.
If everything feels urgent, it's not because you're weak. It's because the system rewards speed and punishes patience.
You can see it in how people talk about money. The conversation used to be about building. Now it's about surviving. I'll catch up next month. I'll start saving when things calm down. I just need to make it to Friday. And it's not because people suddenly became careless or lazy. It's because the distance between fine and falling behind has shrunk. One unexpected bill, one slow week, one rent increase, one medical appointment, one family emergency. The floor feels closer than it used to. You can see the same pattern in work. So many jobs don't ask you to do meaningful things. They ask you to produce proof that you're doing meaningful things. Metrics, reports, meetings about meetings, updates about updates. What did you accomplish this week becomes a ritual, and slowly you start building your life around what can be shown quickly rather than what actually matters. The work that makes systems stronger, training, maintenance, research, relationship building, doesn't always look good in a screenshot, so it gets postponed. Again and again, until the hidden problems become visible problems, and then we act surprised that everything feels fragile. You can see it in business culture too. The modern marketplace has learned how to monetize impatience. The fastest products win, not necessarily the best ones. If you can ship something today, you beat the person build something durable for tomorrow. And in that world, the winning strategy becomes simple. Grow fast, tell a compelling story, and keep moving. If you can look successful long enough, you can attract the next round of attention, the next round of capital, the next round of credibility. The incentives reward speed, not substance. And once a system rewards speed, something emotionally strange happens. People begin rooting for turbulence because turbulence creates opportunity. It trains us to treat instability like fuel. We start scanning every piece of news for what it might do to markets, to prices, to trends, to our timelines. Like the only thing that matters is whether the next wave will lift us or sink us. We stop asking, is this good for people? And start asking, what does this mean for my
When
position?
instability becomes profitable, people start cheering for it. That's how a society quietly trades long-term health for short-term relief.
That's the quiet victory of short-term thinking. It doesn't need to convince you it's noble. It only needs to convince you it's necessary. A lot of people hear this and immediately want to turn it into a character judgment. They want villains, greedy executives, irrational consumers, corrupt politicians. And sure, there are people who exploit the system. There always are. But focusing only on personalities misses the deeper, more uncomfortable truth. Most humans will behave in ways that match what the environment rewards. If the fastest payoff is the highest payoff, even good people will drift towards short-term decisions. Not because they're broken, but because they're adapting. In a world like this, the economy starts to feel like a relay race where everyone is sprinting to pass risk to someone else. Households stretch payments, hoping the next month is easier. Businesses push costs forward, hoping the next quarter looks better. Leaders make decisions that sound good now, hoping the long-term consequences land after they've moved on. Even our personal lives can fall into the same rhythm. Quick fixes, temporary motivation, reactive choices, because it feels safer to control today than to plan for a future that doesn't feel guaranteed. And here's where it gets even more personal. Short-term systems don't just change how money moves. They change how you feel. They create a constant low-grade anxiety that you can't quite name. You may not be panicking, but you're rarely relaxed. You're always a little behind, always a little tired, always a little guilty that you're not doing enough, saving enough, learning enough, becoming enough. And when you live in that state long enough, you start thinking the anxiety is your personality. You blame your willpower. You blame your discipline. You blame your focus. But what if what you're experiencing isn't a personal flaw? What if it's a predictable response to living inside a world that keeps you in motion on purpose? Because short-term thinking wins in one specific way. It makes the future feel unreal. It makes tomorrow feel like a vague suggestion instead of a place you're actually going to live. And when tomorrow doesn't feel real, it's incredibly easy to trade it away. That's how people end up paying extra to break big costs into small ones, because the small payment feels survivable today, even if the total cost is heavier tomorrow. That's how people end up with lifestyles that look stable until one unexpected moment exposes how thin the margin really is. That's how businesses end up with glossy announcements and brittle foundations. That's how entire industries can thrive by selling the feeling of relief, even when the underlying reality is getting tighter. Now, I want to make something clear before we go any further. Noticing this doesn't mean you're doomed. In fact, noticing it is the beginning of freedom. Because the same thing that made short-term thinking win can also help you win your life back. Short-term thinking won because of incentives, because it was rewarded, because it was made easy. And that means long-term thinking can return the same way, by building incentives in your own life that make patience feel rewarding again. Not in a motivational poster way, in a practical, human, emotional way. Most advice you'll hear sounds like be more disciplined. But discipline is a weak strategy when the environment is designed to drain it. A better strategy is to change the scoreboard, to build a life where the long term gets points. So here's a framework I want you to try. It's simple enough to remember when you're tired, but strong enough to change how you make decisions. I call it the 3 anchors: time, margin, and meaning. Time is about reclaiming your horizon. Short-term thinking shrinks your world until you can only see the next crisis. Reclaiming time means choosing a longer lens on purpose. Once a week, sit down for 10 minutes and ask one question. What am I doing that my future self will thank me for? That's it. Not 10 questions. Not a complicated spreadsheet. One honest question asked consistently is surprisingly powerful. Over time, it rewires you to treat your future like a person you actually care about. Margin is about building breathing room. The greatest vulnerability in a short-term world is having no slack. No savings, no rest, no flexibility. That's when every small problem becomes an emergency. Margin doesn't have to start as money. It can be sleep. It can be a buffer in your calendar. It can be a rule that you don't commit to new obligations when you're stressed. It can be a 24-hour pause before emotional purchases and emotional decisions. Margin is what turns panic into choice. Meaning is about building something that can't be flipped. Short-term thinking makes everything disposable, including your attention and your identity. Meaning is the opposite. Meaning is choosing one thing to build slowly, something that gets better the longer you stay with it. A skill, a craft, a community, a body you're proud to live in, a relationship you protect. A project that isn't designed to impress strangers, it's designed to become true. If you've been living under the short-term scoreboard for years, these changes might sound almost too gentle. That's the point. Short-term thinking thrives on drama. Long-term thinking thrives on repetition. The compounding happens in the quiet. And here's a piece most people miss. Long-term thinking needs emotional rewards now, not only later. People don't abandon the long-term because they're stupid. They abandon it because the long-term can feel lonely. So you need rituals that make it feel real today. Celebrate consistency, not just outcomes. Track streaks. Write down wins that don't show up on a paycheck. Surround yourself with people who respect the slow build. If you don't have that circle, create it. A monthly call with 2 or 3 friends where you each share one long-term goal, one obstacle, and one next step can do more for your future than another week of motivational scrolling. Because the truth is, you cannot outthink your environment forever, but you can redesign it. You can make it easier to do what's right for you and harder to do what your anxiety demands. When you start living like this, something shifts. You stop needing life to calm down before you begin. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop thinking in escapes and start thinking in foundations. You start making decisions that don't just solve today's problem. They reduce the odds of the same problem coming back next month with a bigger price tag. And the emotional payoff is bigger than money. You sleep better because your life isn't built on constant improvisation. You carry less shame because you're not always catching up. You feel stronger because your choices aren't dictated by the next wave of pressure. You gain a quiet confidence that doesn't depend on applause. the confidence of being someone who keeps promises to themselves. Short-term thinking may have won the system for a while. It may still be winning in a lot of places, but it doesn't have to win you. You don't need to become a different person overnight. You need to become the kind of person who collects small, the boring victories that compound into stability. You need to build a scoreboard where the future earns points, where margin is a goal, where meaning is non-negotiable. Because whether we plan for it or not, the future is coming. Next month arrives, next year arrives, the consequences arrive. The question is simply this: will you meet them as someone who's been preparing or someone who's been reacting?
The future will arrive either way. The question is simple. Will you meet it prepared, with margin and meaning, or exhausted and reactive?
If you felt stretched, distracted, anxious, constantly one step behind, let this be your permission to stop blaming your character and start challenging the rules you've been living under. The world may be optimized for short-term results, but your life doesn't have to be. You can choose the long game, not because it's easy, but because it's yours. And once you start, you'll realize something hopeful. Long-term thinking never disappeared. It was just waiting for you to make it profitable again, in your time, your margin, and your meaning.